Morning, everybody, and welcome to the Gulf Intelligence Daily Energy Markets Forum, Tuesday, April 20th. We review the open and the markets in Asia and where the direction of travel may move through the day. As we see this morning, oil prices opening in Asia up after being a little bit sideways yesterday. Let's kick off this morning with Kevin Wright in Singapore, lead analyst with APAC at Kpler. Kevin, good morning to you. We should see China waking up any day now for big buying post-maintenance season. What's your outlook at the moment?
Excuse me, very good morning to you, Sean. Good morning to everyone. I think that is certainly one of the impacts we're going to see. I was, in preparation for our discussions today, I was having a quick look at where Chinese inventories stand right now. And from a peak of 960 million barrels last September, we're now at about 935 million barrels. So we've come down by 23 or so million barrels over that period. We're still above pre-COVID levels on Chinese inventories, but you've also got to remember that the Chinese system has taken the opportunity to increase capacity. So you're probably finding a similar level of utilization. And as you say, when the refining system starts to come back from maintenance, we may see more of a draw. We may see that overall inventory level starting to come down.
Good morning to Amina Bakr, Deputy Bureau Chief for Energy Intelligence. Amina, we're once again not far away from what is supposedly an OPEC meeting, but the news overnight would indicate that actually maybe they're going to decide they don't need to meet. What's your reporting telling you?
Good morning, Sean. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, that's right, Sean. We were expecting that there's going to be a JMMC and then an OPEC Plus meeting, both scheduled to be on the 28th of April. But there is discussions happening now between the group members and the ministers, and it might be just downgraded to a JMMC. First of all, I mean, there is no requirement really to alter policy that much. Prices are at a good level. And rocking the boat at this moment is not necessarily needed. Plus, it's Ramadan. Having two meetings that might take a few hours might be exhausting for some of the ministers taking part. So it still hasn't been communicated yet. The co-chairs of the JMMC, meaning Prince Abdulaziz and Russia's Novak, they still need to communicate that, and we'll probably know by today or tomorrow what the situation is.
Is by procedure it required for at least the JMMC to meet? Is that some sort of fixed protocol that has to happen every month?
Yeah, that's the arrangement. I mean, the JMMC really meets to kind of monitor the situation in the market, monitor compliance levels. So the agreement is that they meet on a monthly basis, or when they require. It's more, it should be more regular than the OPEC meetings, and those are just again monitoring compliance levels, market, and any market conditions that require the bigger group to make a decision. So for now, I think just, the function of the committee would be just to monitor where compliance is, and that would be enough for April.
Dr. Andrei Belyi, professor and founder and CEO of Balasen, sitting on the doorstep of Eastern Europe. We have 100,000 Russian troops looking very firmly at Ukraine. One of the bigger geopolitical challenges in the Western world at the moment. What does it look like from your vantage point, Andrei?
Well, of course, all the eyes are now on these growing tensions. And I would say there will be challenges, and it doesn't mean that actually these Russian troops are supposed to enter onto Ukrainian territory. At least officially, Russia declares that these are internal maneuvers and destined to military trainings or whatever. But at the same time, there were some quite explicit messages from Russia to say that actually, if either Ukraine will attempt to take back control over the eastern Ukraine, or NATO, whatever Western powers, including the United States, will amplify or increase their military presence in Ukraine, then Russia might react. What is actually more interesting, or let's say another challenge to the picture, is that Russian servicemen accused two Belarusians for plotting an attempt against the Belarusian president Lukashenko, and they were both arrested on Saturday. And basically, Russia directly accuses the United States of interfering into the Belarus affairs. One of the two plotters has American citizenship, and that definitely one of the elements in the escalation which will certainly emerge.
The US reinstituted sanctions on Belarus yesterday. I mean, when you look at these two issues, Ukraine and Belarus, and you think of it from the perspective of Poland, of Lithuania, of the neighboring countries, what are the bigger issues here? What does the US and Europe have to take into consideration as they kind of stare down Putin once again?
Well, there are two different issues that you mentioned in one sentence. One is the reaction of Poland and Lithuania is one thing, and another what the West plans to do.
Well, surely they need to take into consideration what the regional countries are thinking about this, the precedents that it sets already by giving up Crimea leaves a long legacy of concern, I would think, in the other countries.
True, but let's say both Poland and Lithuania, particularly Lithuania, have their positions, their stances, which might be firmer than those which are defended by the United States and West European countries. Moreover, you may see that the French presidential administration rather tends to find a conciliatory dialogue with Russia.
I mean, the talks they had in France over the weekend seemed to deliver nothing. If I was Ukraine, I'd be a little bit nervous. The West doesn't seem to be really indicating a will.
There was quite an interesting observation by one analyst saying that 2008, Sarkozy, the former president of France, came as an intermediator into Russia-Georgia conflict, which ended up by Russia's recognition of Abkhazia and South Ossetia out of Georgia. 2014, then François Hollande entered as a mediator, and it ended up by Crimea being Russian and by all the events which happen now in the eastern Ukraine. So now Macron enters as a mediator. So let's see what's going to be
maybe this time he'll give up France, and that will be what's on offer. Kevin, let's go back to Asian demand. We're seeing big developments in India overnight. The shutdown of the biggest cities, the most populous area of the country, is under a great duress on COVID. We're seeing declines in demand for products. What's your outlook on that?
Yeah, it's a sad story. It's a very sad development that effectively what seemed to have been relatively under control in February was perhaps a false dawn. And I think a lot of the actions taken by the government, from cricket to the Kumbh Mela to political rallies, have really opened India up. You know, it's a very, very densely populated country, and they've opened India up to this horrific second wave. We're getting effectively now a new 1 million cases every 3 or 4 days, where the first 1 million cases took over 100 days to establish themselves. So you're seeing it spreading like wildfire. Now, the thing that we were looking at ourselves was around gasoline demand in particular. And we saw gasoline demand actually showing some real signs of life towards the end of last year, towards the end of the fourth quarter. It was up above pre-COVID levels for the first time all year. But I think with these lockdowns, as you say, certainly Delhi going into it, Maharashtra, which will mean Mumbai, of course, then I think there's no chance for gasoline demand to stay as it has been. I think the stats say that overall last year, or over the last fiscal year, which ended on the 31st of March, gasoline demand was down by about 7% year on year. So that gives you an idea of what happened last year, even with a slight recovery into the fourth quarter. So I think going into lockdowns, going into restrictions on mobility, transportation, and even industrial activity for the diesel side can only harm demand. It can only harm consumer demand for petroleum products.
Well, we have an announcement by the US State Department overnight, what they call a level 4 do not travel, to 80% of the world. 160 countries were put on the US do not travel list. This has to have fallout for demand recovery. Kevin, your thoughts?
Yeah, same. I mean, whether you want to talk about the travel aspect, i.e. the international travel aspect and jet fuel, that just is an ongoing sort of damming of an already damned position, right? Jet fuel demand has been terrible for a year. What's going to happen to demand in the States? Well, we see that actually on-highway miles are higher than they've been since before COVID. In March, they were 1% higher than they'd been for the whole of last year, and actually year on year, higher than 2019 levels. Sorry, I should say year on 2 years, 2019 levels. So there's a sign that highway miles are effectively showing us that the consumer is getting more confident, but actually overall gasoline demand is still down. So that shows us that whilst people are driving further, they're not carrying out the same short distances that you'd normally expect. So the work from home aspect, for example, is having a big impact on US gasoline demand.
You would think, Amina, a lot of these issues, India, of course, has ranked highly in the thoughts of the OPEC conversation in recent months. The challenges now facing may give some pause, but also, I suppose, the flip side of that, another OPEC relevant story is Libya is facing a few challenges at the moment, so production is down there.
Yeah, that's right, Sean. They'll keep an eye on where demand goes, but I imagine also they wouldn't want to make too many U-turns because that kind of creates uncertainty and volatility in the market. But if it does require, and they do see demand slowing down significantly, I mean, the Saudi Energy Minister, Prince Abdulaziz, mentioned that they will use the mechanism that they have in place and they won't hesitate to put a pause on bringing back those barrels into the market. So that could happen for sure. But one other thing as well that they're watching very carefully, I mean, the news that we've just gotten last week is that the very positive talks between the US and Iran and the possibility of sanctions lifting off of Iran. So that's another possibility of having more supply coming into the market. We still don't have a time frame. We don't know how the sanctions will be lifted, etc. But that's something to be watched.
What are the sort of reporting you're hearing from Vienna? There does seem to be positive tones, but nothing that would indicate real progress. I don't know if that. What are your thoughts?
What we heard is that I mean, both sides are very keen on signing some form of new pact. So with that in mind, and I mean, we've been hearing from both the US and the Iranian side, both saying that it's very promising and the talks went very well. And I think there's a keenness from the Iranians to sign something before the elections come up. So we might see something develop quite fast.
Yes, I think there is a surprise possibility here, given the window between now and the elections in Iran are closing. Andrea, what do you think the position from Russia is? We're seeing that on the sidelines of these meetings in Vienna, that the Russians are actually taking the opportunity, the Russians and the Americans, to hold bilateral meetings regarding Russian sanctions.
Well, I don't think that Russian sanctions will anyway be lifted by the US. Indeed, Biden proposed last week to have a direct summit with Putin, but it actually meant taking the tensions under control. It didn't mean that actually they plan to decrease the control, but somebody has to take the initiative over these diplomatic tensions. And I would say there are very little chances that any moves on Russia's sanctions will happen. On the contrary, Russia indicates very clearly that actually doesn't care about sanctions. It doesn't care about the American position overall. And actually, this case in Ukraine is a test for Biden's administration, basically to what extent will they go? Because I mean, all these declarations that Biden started with, that actually they're going to be the new leader of the free world and will counter Russia and China. So Russia responds by some facts and by some deeds to test where are the limits of Biden's administration. So in reality, there is no intent to decrease the tensions, neither on American or on Russian side. What is actually, however, interesting here is that Russia's oil products have actually increased
to the US.
To the US, but it doesn't mean anything in terms of geopolitical terms. Both for Washington and for Moscow, economics and geopolitics are kind of a part of each other. And for the same reason, I don't believe that Nord Stream 2 has anything to do with this, as some sources in Russia say, we actually don't care about the Ukrainian transit in this affair.
Kevin, Matt Stanley on the message group is suggesting he should become a zookeeper for reasons that the calling the market direction is beyond him. There might be other reasons why he should become a zookeeper, but in terms of the counterintuitive, demand from India clearly down on signals there. We've got OPEC supply coming next month, yet prices are rising today. And rising relatively strong in open early trade. Your thoughts on that, that sort of counterintuitive reaction? And the reporting seems to be with API coming out later today, we're going to see another drawdown.
Yeah, I don't think he's wrong. I mean, Matt, I read Matt's commentaries on a regular basis. And
you don't think it's wrong that he should become a zookeeper, or he's wrong on...
well, I don't know.
I
feel sorry for the animals, because the most common word in his commentary is confused. So
we are the animals in this case.
Absolutely, we are. But I mean, coming back to your question, yeah, I mean, I talked about Chinese inventories earlier. We looked at OECD inventories that are obviously down. The US inventories are going to be down. Distillate inventories are going to be down. And highway miles, as I was just saying, on gasoline are up. So all of these things combined with a slightly weaker dollar in the last 6 weeks, yeah, that's your explanation for the 70 or so, or slightly more cents that crude is up this morning. There's not much more to it than that. I think there's a directional thing going on as well. I think, you know, people have got kind of comfortable with the range that we're in. And I think OPEC is making responsible noises. I mean, Amina mentioned earlier that we just expect to see probably just the JWMC rather than the full committee meeting this week, which suggests to me that they also think prices are relatively stable and they don't need to take further action. And I think all of that is being basically priced in today into where we are.
What about refining margins with the developments in India, Kevin? Do you think we could see refining margins open up a bit? Spread tighten?
You mean rise or fall?
Fall.
I was going to say, yeah, I don't think they'll open up. I think they'll fall.
This is the counterintuitive day. Anything could happen, right?
Well, that's true. But then for margins to rise, given where we are on crude, you'd have to see cracks to improve quite significantly. And I don't really think that product demand is there strongly enough yet in most of the world for cracks to rise. I mean, look at margins in the US, they're relatively strong, right? Margins on crudes like Mars are sort of $6 and $7 a barrel. In Europe, negative, and in Asia, just about neutral. So really, the margin picture right now I don't think is what's driving crude. I know ultimately it's all about petroleum products, but I think there's a lot of geopolitical interest and sort of macro in the crude price rather than just margins themselves.
Amina, we've been blessed or cursed, whatever way you side of the trade you're on, by the surprises that the minister in Saudi Arabia continues to deliver to the market over the last 3 meetings. We will miss not having a surprise this month. I'm wondering your thoughts on the continuation of that strategy, and is there one buried anywhere that we're not seeing?
Well, it might be buried at the end of this month, Sean. We're just guessing that as I mentioned, it hasn't been decided formally yet that it's just going to be a JMMC. They're still in discussions about it. But the surprise, maybe they will have a meeting on the same day and they will decide some kind of policy change. But they are as well, many of the officials at OPEC Plus are surprised at how the market is responding to geopolitical risk, to demand, there is a kind of disconnect, which is concerning to them too. And it's very hard to predict. But they were quite happy last time when they decided to gradually increase production, and that led to an increase in prices. Surprised, but they were glad that happened. But it just makes the environment very unpredictable.
Is there, Amina, any sense of the point of compliance? We've had with the Saudi unilateral cut a little bit of a fog around 100+% compliance. Is there any crack in compliance that is one to identify or report upon?
In terms of Saudi Arabia, Sean, we believe that they have been delivering on the promises that they've been making. But the cracks really are with the countries that still have to make up for the extra production, the compensation cuts. Now, during the last meeting, we saw that there was an agreement that countries that had those extra volumes would have more time to make up for the cuts. They extended the compensation cuts up to September, so they're giving them more time to make up for that. And quite honestly as well, Iraq has been doing a good job at cutting more of its production, and I think that's due to the stronger relationship right now that they have with Saudi Arabia. And we saw the recent reporting that Saudi Arabia had talks with Iran that were organized in Baghdad, these direct communications. So the link between Iraq and Saudi Arabia is leading, one of the byproducts is higher compliance by Iraq to its quotas.
Let's go to the room with today's survey question on the points made by Amina there. Does the market need OPEC Plus to hold another meeting this month to review supply strategy? They met on April 1st, I think it was. The plan is now to meet on April 28th. It doesn't feel like there's any great expectation or need screaming from the market, but what does the room think? Does the market need OPEC to meet this month? Andrea, I didn't get a definitive sense from you in your opening comments. Where is this standoff in Ukraine going to go? In your opinion, is there a great risk here that this could flare up? Is it posturing? What is your outlook? What are the next steps? Where is this going to go, do you think?
Well, overall, if you look at the trend, Russia is certainly increasing its grip over the part of the former Soviet territory. And that definitely what happens now in Belarus with the alleged plot against Lukashenko, including the alleged assassination of the Belarusian president, and also what's going on in Ukraine, because basically what some Russian officials say is that Ukraine is a neutral country which recognizes, let's say, rights of the breakaway republics, whatever we call them, or we put under question the very sovereignty of Ukraine. Whatever we think about it, like it doesn't mean that we have to agree or disagree with that. It's certain indication that Russia plans to increase its grip over the region. And that is actually where we have to understand the overall logic. So there is no immediate threat I think, of the war unless the situation gets out of control. And overall, the objective is, Moscow's objective is to increase the influence, the political influence, and to reduce a risk that Western American, particularly militaries, would be deployed in Ukraine. Maybe not under NATO, because I mean there are very little chances that Ukraine becomes a member of NATO, but even of any military cooperation which would be avoided. So overall, we see that, answering your question, whether in the short term there is a risk of a conflict, I would say the risk is pretty tough, it's pretty high, but not for now. I would watch out for summer. And let's also watch out what the Russian president will tell during his announcements on the 21st of April, and what the summit between Russian president and Belarusian president on 22nd of April will result of. I would say these two dates are to watch out.
Well, we also have coming up this weekend is the Biden-hosted Global Climate Conference. Although virtual, all of the players will be on the screen, whether that offers a moment of reducing tensions. Kevin, in your corner of the world, one of those green or orange dots behind you, oh no, that's actually the Middle East, so you're actually not including your corner of the world in your map today. But nonetheless, in your corner of the world in the South China Sea, we had a fairly robust statement from the Filipino president overnight, Mr. Duterte, essentially shooting arrows at the Chinese that if they did indeed start to do some drilling for oil, he would be sending the naval vessels and it could get bloody, was his quote. What are your thoughts on that problem? It's been festering away now for a number of weeks. Is there any escalation there of concern?
Two principal observations. The first being that Mr. Duterte is not averse to the occasional controversial comment and the occasional aggressive comment towards his neighbors. And the second one is that the Philippines has basically just gone into another lockdown. They're having a disastrous time with managing coronavirus. And he's a massive populist, probably only done in the populism stakes by Boris Johnson. So given that Duterte craves that support from the mainstream, I think that's really more of the background than really the prospect of any confrontation in the near future.
So red meat for the street, basically.
If you put it that way, yeah. I think it's the right thing for the Filipino audience.
Although one would have to say that eventually one of these sparks in the South China Sea is going to deliver something, because there just seems to be so many of them, one after the other. Before Amina gets the last word, let's see what the survey tells us today about whether she should be going to virtual Vienna next week. Does the market need 50-50 by the looks of things there, Amina? Your own thoughts on the need for that, and indeed, would the not happening or it happening give any signals either way?
Well, not happening, yeah, it would give a signal, as Kevin mentioned, that there is no need to change the course of the policy, and that's how we read it as well. And whether there is a need or not, personally, I don't think that there is a need. They just had a meeting earlier this month, and changing course again might just be too fast for the market. But we'll see. Next couple of days, that'll be confirmed.
It would feels like waiting a few weeks at the moment, with the US opening up into the summer, with Asia now looking like the situation with India and other places where this COVID pandemic is raging. It may be better to pause and see where these things play out.
Yeah, for sure. And Sean, they can call a meeting anytime. I mean, these meetings happen virtually. On very short notice, they could arrange a meeting and call for an emergency OPEC meeting. So that's not an issue at all.
Right. Well, let's leave this meeting there on that point. Amina Bakker, thank you so much for your contributions today. Kevin in Singapore and Andre in Eastern Europe, thank you so much for your time and engagement. We'll catch up with everybody in the coming days. All the best.